It's been a wondrous time for Masters of the Universe collectors with multiple retail lines on shelves at the same time, and all of them are good. And with the arrival of these new Eternia Masterverse figures, and with more on the way, the question a lot of us collectors have is, can this line rival the legendary Masters of the Universe Classics? And I thought the only fair way to do that was to buy some of those original MOTU Classics figures to compare to these new Eternia Masterverse figures and try to answer the question, can Masterverse beat MOTUC? We'll try to do that on this episode of Geek Dad Life. Hello everybody and welcome to Geek Dad Life. It's your host, Jay Gladfelter here. I don't need to retread the Masters of the Universe Classics toy line other than to say it was a legendary toy line. I was a subber from the very beginning, and each month when we would get a new figure in the mail, it was so much fun. Now, I tapped out of collecting MOTUC in around 2015, and the line would go on for like another 5 years after that. Fast forward to today, the value of those MOTUC figures is astronomical when you compared to what we paid for them back in the day, but the price has softened a little bit. A lot of factors could go into that, but I would have to think that one of them is because of this Masterverse MOTU toy line. Now, I will readily admit the first few figures in the Masterverse toy line couldn't hold a candle to MOTUC, but some of their recent waves, and especially these new Eternia figures, actually look pretty darn good. And when I actually got my hands on the new Eternia Barbarian Skeletor and Viking He-Man, I felt like I really wanted to kind of rewind and go back to some of those MOTUC figures and compare them and see if truly the Masterverse toy line could compete or even beat the legendary Masters of the Universe Classics. Now, I famously traded away my MOTUC collection to my buddy John, who I host Toy Geeks with, a few years back. So to truly do this, I would have to go out and buy original mock MOTUC figures to compare to these new Eternia Skelly and He-Man. So this was a pricey video to make, so if you like this one and want me to do more like it for some of the future releases in the Masterverse toy line, hit that like button, and if you want to see when those drop, click the subscribe button and that bell icon. Now, the first category I'm going to use to compare the MOTUC figures and these Masterverse figures is cost, and this one is going to be hard for MOTUC to compete just because it is so expensive if you have not already bought these figures to get into MOTU Classics. Now, for this example of He-Man, this is the original release, not the one with the original burst sticker. No, this is the first release. These go from anywhere to $150 to $180 on eBay and other type of toy seller sites. And the same goes for Skeletor. This is an original, like the original burst version, so a later release of the Skeletor figure. And again, he's around $150. So you're looking about $300 to get the original MOTUC version of He-Man and Skeletor. These new Eternia figures are current releases, and they come in a lot cheaper than going for the secondary market on MOTUC. You're looking anywhere between $22 and $25 for this figure, so I'll round up and say you're looking at $50 for the new Eternia version of He-Man and Skeletor. So the math is pretty simple here. The MOTUC figures are way more expensive, so if you're starting out today and you're trying to get the most bang for your buck, these Masterverse figures are where it's at. Now, if you bought these MOTUC figures when they were originally released, well, you're doing pretty well for your return on investment. Next up is the packaging, and to be honest, I have not been a fan of the Masterverse packaging from the beginning, and I haven't been a fan of the MOTUC packaging from the beginning. I thought they should have went with the exploding red rocks of the original MOTU card backs, and honestly, Super 7's Ultimate version of the classic figures used it, and it looked so much better than the original MOTUC cards and bubbles. I understand some people might like them, but for me, they were always a pass. And then Masterverse, it's just a really boring front for the box, but I have enjoyed the original art that's on the back and the sides of the boxes, and these new Eternia figures feature art from the amazing Nate Barch. So it's kind of a toss-up between the two of these. You could probably pick either one, but for me personally, I'm going to back the one that features the art of the wonderful Nate Barch. All right, we've got 2 in the win column for Masterverse, but it's now time to open up these original MOTUC figures and the Masterverse figures and see if these new Masterverse can really compete with the legendary 4 Horsemen sculpted Masters of the Universe Classics He-Man and Skeletor. Oh man, I have not opened up a MOTU Classics figure in, gosh, almost 8 years. And I gotta say, this kind of wave of nostalgia flowed over me as I was opening up this He-Man MOTUC figure. It was the first one that I bought at Comic-Con in 2009 when they had some excess stock. And it is what got me totally bought into this toy line. And oh my, it still has that same effect on me as I opened this one up today in 2022. I had forgotten the quality of these figures when you take them out of their packaging. It is light years beyond the toys that we get today, just in terms of the way the plastic looks, how it feels in hand. There's just this weight to it, this quality to it, that even, you know, the Super 7 Ultimates figures don't quite match compared to this original He-Man release from MOTUC. There is very little wrong with this He-Man figure. A little bit of paint slop here and there on the accessories like his harness, but the joints all feel great. No loose joints, which was a problem with the line back then. Everything works as it should. It displays well, it holds his accessories well, and honestly, it is just as impressive as the one that I bought 13 years ago, and I have fallen in love all over again. My MOTUC Skeletor was not as enjoyable as the He-Man, but it's still a fantastic figure. The main problem with this one was that his Havoc staff, the way it was kind of packaged with the Skeletor over all these years, had kind of bent, and there's actually a plastic stress mark on the staff. So, you know, it's a bit of a bummer that happened with the way this packaging was done. But again, as like I said before, I've never been a big fan of the packaging. It's always a little bit too small for the figures, and when you have to cram in a lot of stuff into the package, it can lead to bends and stress marks on the figures, especially when they've been in their package for over a decade. Putting that minor gripe aside, these figures are still fantastic and honestly hit me a little bit harder in the nostalgia feels than I thought they would. But I don't want to linger too long on these MOTUC figures. Now it's time to open up these Masterverse figures, and we'll start with He-Man, probably my least favorite out of all of them. It may have been unfair to open the MOTUC figures before these Masterverse figures, but after opening up the MOTUC He-Man and then opening up this Masterverse He-Man, it is a stark difference in terms of quality in the plastic. The Masterverse figure is way shinier than the MOTUC figure. The joints are a little bit stickier. So there's definitely a drop off in the quality of, you know, the production of this toy. Now this new Eternia He-Man or Viking He-Man is clearly taking inspiration from Mark Taylor's original He-Man concept. And, you know, I think that's fun. I think it does lead to a unique and new version of He-Man, which is cool. It's always nice to get new looks, but this one just doesn't quite nail it for me. The shoulder pads are too bulky. The head sculpts are all right. You know, the Masterverse line hasn't nailed a He-Man head sculpt yet. And again, in all fairness, a lot of people didn't like the head sculpt on the MOTUC He-Man when it first came out. But, you know, it looks a little wonky, look a little too doughy to me. But I like that the shoulder pads can be removed so that the harness, you know, has the more traditional He-Man look. I also love the small knife that kind of goes into his boot. And his power sword looks pretty solid. The battle axe seems a little too small in this figure's hands. I mean, honestly, this He-Man figure is a lot bigger than the Barbarian Skeletor and some of the other figures in the Masterverse line. So I don't know why that is necessarily the case, but it kind of makes some of the weapons seem out of scale with this figure. So there's some things I like, some things I don't like with this figure, but when you have it side by side with the MOTUC He-Man, it's not even close. The MOTUC He-Man is the figure that got me into Masters of the Universe Classics, and it still holds up today as arguably the best He-Man figure we've ever gotten, and it is no more apparent than when it's next to this Masterverse new Eternia He-Man. But the Skeletor, the new Eternia Masterverse Skeletor, is fantastic. For starters, the unique new Eternia look for Skeletor looks way cooler than the Viking He-Man. The helmet with the Skeletor beard looks really cool. Also, I love the soft goods cape. That's something that MOTUC didn't do, and I think it looks way better as soft goods versus the hard plastic that MOTUC utilized. I love the unique sword that he comes with, but the Havoc staff looks way too much like a toy, way too plasticky, and so it kind of serves its purpose, but if I could swap it out with a cooler looking one, I definitely would. But where this figure really shines for me is when you take off the Barbarian Skeletor accessories and give him his classic Skeletor look, which is basically just swapping out the heads and then removing the cape and kind of cowl accessory, and you have a really cool looking Skeletor figure. Honestly, and then this may be controversial to say, but when I put it next to the MOTUC Skeletor, I kind of prefer the look of the Masterverse Skeletor. The more traditional Skeletor head sculpt that you get with this new Eternia Skeletor looks fantastic. It's got, you know, the classic Skeletor look, but doing something new with it. And that's true throughout this figure. His harness, his loincloth, everything hits all of the right classic iconic Skeletor notes while kind of feeling refreshed and new. And unlike the He-Man figure, which scales too big to stand next to your MOTUC figures, this Skeletor fits right in scale with the MOTUC toy line. Feel free to call me a fool in the comments, but honestly, I might rather have this version of Skeletor on my shelf next to my MOTUC He-Man because it looks a little more menacing and has a little bit more personality than the MOTUC Skeletor. Now, again, the MOTUC Skeletor is still a fantastic figure, and you could argue it's the greatest Skeletor action figure of all time. But for me personally, I really like the look of the Masterverse new Eternia Skeletor. So after this very expensive exercise to see if Masterverse could compete or eventually beat MOTUC, I have to say that MOTUC's spot as the #1 Masters of the Universe toy line remains intact. But after my experience with this Skeletor figure, I think that Masterverse could compete with the MOTUC line. There may very well be versions of characters that we get in Masterverse that you may like better than what you have seen or gotten in Masters of the Universe Classics. But MOTUC lasted for so long and we got so many characters from all over the MOTU lore, it's gonna be really hard for Masterverse to ever attain that level of quantity and quality that the Masters of the Universe Classics toy line accomplished. I want to thank the people that make this show possible, my patrons, especially this episode. I would not be able to go out and buy pretty expensive MOTUC figures to do this video without your support. You can find a full list of them right here. If you'd like to see your name, become a patron today at patreon.com/geekdadlife. Definitely check out some of my other videos like this one that YouTube wants you to check out in one of my more recent videos. And until next time, hasta luego and goodbye.